But now we're going to come right back to the conversation.
Yeah.
So we always are like, okay,
That's
now we
awesome.
can relax and do the part that we really like to do.
Now this is the after the show. Now
This is
they
after
click
the
to get
show.
more.
You are with
Yeah.
us. So obviously very important to you, very passionate. I love that you included the area. Have you ever seen the series Dope Sick that talks about the opioid epidemic starting with in those states?
I think Painkiller is the one I saw. I know there are a couple,
Okay.
and they're very similar and based on the Sackler
Yeah.
family and what happened there. And
It was incredibly fascinating.
Fascinating.
And eye-opening, angering,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of things. But I always say if they put history into movies, then I can learn a little bit better.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I watched the series, and it was a 3-day thing. I don't watch miniseries, but in 3 days, I remember each of those nights I struggled to sleep. I would wake up sweating, and I understand how all of that works and how it's played out, and it was still to me it just
Re-triggering.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it sits a certain kind of way, knowing that a lot of this actually stems from people who knew what was happening and continued to press forward in the name of money.
Yeah.
That's what's I hate to think that is the world we live in. I hate to think that. And I fight against it really hard in my brain, but watching that series Dope Sick really made me understand what happened and brought to light a lot of those things. My middle son too I always thought people that got addicted to opioids tried to, or they abused them, I really had that's the idea I had in my head was like, well.
They were looking for the easy feel good.
Right, you obviously, because I will admit, when I've got a few painkillers left after the injury, I have to throw them away. Otherwise, I will take those.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, that's clearly what happens to people. Well, my middle son had his tonsils removed. And then the week later, none of us seem to do well with this. The week later, starts bleeding, had to go in and have another surgery. The doctor actually yelled at me for not giving him enough pain medication. And he was 18 years old at the time. He said, he is a grown man, and I said, well, I was just giving him like half a pill, about half of what they had suggested. And that seemed to be okay, and he was just really gave me a hard time for that, and I felt so bad. Of course, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I caused my kid all this pain. We go home from the second surgery, I gave him the full amount. I mean, he was like dead to the world.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, well, sorry doctor, we're not doing that. But so the whole thing was maybe 2.5 weeks, and he could not get better. And he'd keep coming upstairs, and he hurt, and he just wasn't getting over this. And one day he came up, and it was just like a light bulb went on, and I was like, oh my God, it's the painkillers. It is and so I had started to try to wean him off, and it just was like, oh my goodness, this is what it is. And just like that, he was already addicted. Yeah, I mean, it was so scary and awful, and it took another 2 weeks of him being sick to get him through that.
Yeah.
And I was always so thankful that he didn't realize or try to, that he didn't maybe know if he would have just taken another one, he'd have felt better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was glad that I was like, well, I'm really kind of glad that either you aren't pushing this or that you're maybe not aware that this is actually the relief of your pain too, which of course is just going to lead to more problems. But that experience taught me, and then along with watching that series, that people are not trying to get addicted.
No.
No, it's awful what happens. Yeah. So if you're willing to, I would love to hear about your story. I know you've got a lot. So whatever you want to share with us about your why behind the walk, about your own personal journey, I'd love to hear, Jason.
Yeah, you hit on something really powerful there, which is this idea that people who struggle with drugs and alcohol walk into that life and are just looking for fun and ignoring all of the bad signs. I recorded a video the other day, and one of the things I said was, we have this misconception that alcohol and drugs are my problems. They were actually something that served as a solution for me. By the time I found drugs and alcohol, I was 12 years old when I kind of started dabbling in the drinking and then smoking cigarettes and some marijuana, and it just progressed. by the time I got there, I was 12, so you can imagine I was
Yeah.
getting sick drinking whiskey out of a bottle.
Sure.
That's
Yes.
really hanging out with people older.
Yep.
So I didn't feel good. None of that was a good experience. But underneath everything, I had this pain that I was really trying to soothe and run from, and I really wanted to belong somewhere. So I'm hanging out with these older kids.
Yep.
This is what they're doing. I'm willing to suffer through the sickness, through all the
Right.
things, the hangover, because I just want to feel like I belong somewhere. So there's this thing underneath me happening. So I say that, you know, I had those issues with, and the pain that came with drugs and alcohol, that actually deters a lot of people. But for me, it was so much less than the pain that I was experiencing in my head and in my heart that I was willing to stick it out, because it actually started to serve as a solution. I felt a little bit better, a little bit more okay. So it's an important thing, that because we do get that wrong in our society. I wrote a book, and you know, it's one of the reasons I wrote it, because we have a world that looks at this and goes, it's not that hard. It's a math equation. Your problems are on this side of the equal sign.
Right.
Here's you. Here's drugs and alcohol. Well, when you put all this together, this is what you get.
Right.
You want to change the equation, remove one of the inputs. And I could not figure out how to do that. And again, that's what led me to think there's something wrong with me. If everybody else thinks this is so easy,
Right.
and I can't figure it out, I don't belong on this planet. So then I turned suicidal. But you know, it did for me start at a very young age with mental health and growing up, and just the anxiety, the depression.
Yep.
I was 10 years old when I first contemplated, and I remember holding a knife to my chest going, I wonder how much this would hurt before it was over, you know, how long would that last? And I was 10 years old in a kitchen, you know, and maybe not completely serious, but I was having those kinds of
Those
thoughts.
were coming in.
And so 12 years old, you know, I run into something that, you know, again, makes me sick in the beginning, but eventually starts to turn the things in here off and starts to numb some of those feelings. It was a recipe for me to, of course, continue down that path and try to feel okay in this world. That was my problem.